Hello and welcome to a second Ask Me Anything session with me, Chris Finn. I've been making podcasts for a few years. I built a folio of more than a dozen shows for a publisher here in Scotland, and I'm now out of a job. I'm redundant, and so I want to use some of this time I have to help other people, particularly those who come from underrepresented groups or who are otherwise marginalised, but all are welcome. Some people might join this call, but if nobody does, I've got a couple of questions I'm going to answer anyway. And if you're watching this now, you're watching on YouTube, where there is an edited version of this call going up. The first question I'm going to answer is one that I see come up often in various subreddits that I'm a part of, and it is, what do I need to make a podcast? You need a way of recording it, a way of editing it, even if only very, very lightly, like taking the start and end off or putting some music on or something, and a way of publishing it. The way of publishing it is usually through a podcast host, and if you're just getting started and you don't want to spend any money, most people would recommend you use Anchor, which is a free host from Spotify. You don't get as many options as you would get otherwise, and your options might be a bit limited, but it is at least free. And indeed, I have a podcast hosted on Anchor that I do with my wife, and it is perfectly serviceable. There's always a chance the rug will get pulled from under you, though, so you just got to be a little bit careful about that. In terms of the editing, most people would recommend something like Audacity as a really basic way of doing things, but I actually wouldn't recommend Audacity, even though it's free and quite capable. It is a destructive audio editor. That is to say, every change you make is irrevocable. You're baking that change in for each thing you make. And so I would recommend something like Reaper or Hindenburg, neither of which I will confess I've used in much detail, but people who know the space really well will recommend those. And they have very cheap entry prices to get started. The software that I'll use is Adobe Audition, which is a very high-end professional digital audio workstation, or DAW as it's sometimes called. And there's another equivalent of that, which is Apple's own software called Logic Pro. And the thing about those bits of software is when you first open them, and I kind of resisted it for a while because, like, Macs, which is what I've used for years, always used really, they come with a bit of software called GarageBand, which is again quite capable, but looks quite approachable. But whenever you load up a very complicated bit of software like Audition, it looks quite intimidating because there's lots and lots and lots of buttons. But what I will say is that actually, even though I resisted using and learning something like Audition for a long time, it's absolutely true to say that if you take the time to learn, it will save you time in the long run. In part, that's to do with the nature of just any kind of multi-track editor, where each voice is on its own track. You get much more flexibility. But also things like with Audition, setting up templates and putting markers where particular bits go, having standing audio in your templates, a lot of things that it can do to automate and speed up the process of editing your audio. And then for the first part of that setup of what you need to make recording, you need a way of recording it. And I'm actually not even going to try and answer that here because the challenge is, and like on the various podcasting subreddits that I'm a member of or forums, that question is asked multiple times a day. What do I need to record a podcast? And the first answer always comes back is, what are you trying to record? Is it one person, two people, three people? Is it all remote? Is it a blend? Where will you be? Will you be around the table? Will you be out and about? And more than that, it's about what is now, and then what headroom do you need to build for yourself to be able to go on and grow the show in different ways. Is 70% of your show going to be two people around the table, but 10% will be with a phoned-in guest, another 20% will be done on location somewhere? You got to think, because the particular kit you're going to get depends on those questions being answered, and particularly you got to think about what that future proofing looks like to be able to get people to be able to get some kit now that's got that will do exactly what you need just now and do it really well, but has got a little bit of space for you to grow in the ways that you might want to grow in the future. Because there's not an awful lot of point, not no point, and if you're very, very tightly budget constrained, I understand, but often it's a false economy to buy only the thing you need right this second once, because actually you'll probably need to replace that kit wholesale with something later down the line as your ambitions grow. So somebody like me or forums or others can answer that question: what particular hardware do you need to get started with? But you need to really clearly define what the job is for your recording now and in the future, so that you can create a set of. So here's a really good example. The microphone that I'm talking to you on just now is a Samsung Q9U. And it has both a USB connection and an XLR connection. So the USB connection lets it connect directly up to your Mac or PC and record that way. But it is a very, very bad idea to try to record with two USB microphones at once connected into the same computer, or indeed connected into different computers, and then trying to sync them up in post. It's strongly, strongly recommended you don't try, because you'll spend an awful lot of time trying to troubleshoot and to manually correct stuff. Due to things like audio drift and mic bleed and a lot of technical things that mean it's just a very, very bad idea, so don't do it. However, if you start off with a solo podcast, or you start off in a podcast where it's you and somebody else, but they're for most of the time in a different town or city or country, then a USB connecting mic is grand and will do really well. And you don't need the expense or complexity of an interface to allow you to take the XLR connection from your mic into your computer to be able to record that way. But the reason I quite like this microphone and its smaller brother, the Samsung Q2U, which is a sort of legendary microphone for podcasters, is because they've got both. So they've got that room to grow. So you can buy it and use it as a USB microphone as you're starting out or doing solo or doing remote. But if you want to get around the table and connect multiple microphones up into a mixer or interface, a multi-track interface, then you can do that over the XLR connection instead of this great big meaty connection that's in the back of it here. You can do that. And that's really good. So it's often a case not of, and this microphone, I can't actually remember off the top of my head, I think it's about 100 quid. So it's, of course, it's not a small amount of money. The Q2U is usually cheaper. It's usually about 60 quid. It's not cheap, I understand that. But there are microphones like this and that are of similar quality. I'm always wary of that, because it's not really about how good it is. It's about how suited it is to a task, but of similar quality to this, such as the Rode Procaster, which is a microphone I'm very familiar with from my last job, and which we had half a dozen of them in the company. We had about 60 Q2Us, I think, but with the Procasters from Rode, we had half a dozen over thereabouts. They're about 120 quid, they're slightly more expensive, but they're XLR only. So you could spend about this, and I'm not really going to get into a review of the quality. Basically, they're both really good microphones, the Q9U that I'm talking to you on, and the Rode Procaster, but it is XLR only, and this is XLR and USB. And that doesn't trump, that's not a good enough reason in and of itself to pick this microphone over the Procaster. Indeed, when I was buying this mic, I was sorely tempted to get the Procaster because I know how good it is and I know how to use it really well. I'm very familiar with it. But I got this one because I was curious to know how well this one worked as a kind of upgraded version of the Q2U, as thinking about advising clients and employers in the future. But my point is, this is a microphone that you could buy today, use it today for education, for Zoom calls, or like our Google Meet calls like I'm doing just now, or content creation. But then tomorrow you could plug it into a mixing desk and do some interesting things with it. So people say, what do you need to start a podcast? A way of recording it, a way of editing it, and a way of distributing it, recording it. Oh, it says only one here. It says call will end in 2 minutes. I want to stay in the call. Wow. You're the only one here. I know, Google. I know. You need those three things to get a podcast out there. You also, of course, need an idea. You need talent, talent with a capital T. I mean, you need people to do it, and that's another conversation for another time. I'm going to answer one question that came in to my Twitter account, which is at Chris Finn, from an old industry colleague, Ian McKenzie, who said, and it's a brilliant question. That's why I'm going to power through with this charade. A really, really good question. If there's two people or more, but we're going to stick with two people because the same lesson applies to if there's 6 people or whatever. If there's 2 people on a podcast, can they ever truly be co-hosts, or is there always a power imbalance between them? Which is a phenomenal question. There's a lot of different aspects to it. The simple headline is, of course, 2 people or more can have co-host status, and they can have absolutely equal status in how they present to the audience and how the audience perceives them, in theory. Of course, there will always be slight shifts in that. Some of that is baked in societal stuff. If you have a man and a woman, the man will very often appear to have more authority because we live in a patriarchal society. I'm not saying that's a good thing. I'm actually explicitly saying that's often a bad thing, but those kind of power dynamics can be part of that, and you should be very aware of those. And so if you're a producer or you're just putting together a show and you have, for example, a woman and a man, you've got to think about ways of ensuring that pairing gets equal airtime, or not even equal airtime. It's not about numbers. It's just they both occupy the same status in the minds of the listener. However, although 2 voices or more can have the same status, it is a recipe for anarchy if nobody is nominally in charge. Now, that could be a different person each time. You could rotate it. You could do different things with it. But you often need to have somebody in charge. And when I say in charge, it's a funny thing. And I tried to, when I was writing back to Ian on Twitter, it's interesting how this impacts, because actually the person who is in charge actually might appear to have a lower status in the pairing, or the however many people it is. Because when I say in charge, I don't mean that they are dominating the conversation or even leading the conversation, but they're the one who's doing the structure and the format. And because they're the one doing the structure and the format, and that might be a welcome, or it might be a let's move on, or it might be a we've got Peter on the line, let's bring him in and hear what he has to say. Those kind of logistical bits. Because they're doing that, the other person, it often has more apparent authority and power in leading the actual meat of the conversation, because the person who is doing the signposting and the let's move on and the follow us on Facebook, like and subscribe, that kind of stuff, they can often appear a bit like a functionary, but they are still in charge in the sense that they're the one who's deciding when we move on. They're the one who is, moving the beat of the show on. And the reason it's important to have somebody who will do that is because if you don't, things can get flabby because nobody's quite prepared to go, right, we're stopping this now, for example. But also because you then get really, if nobody's in charge, you can get very manky bits of, right, what are we doing now? Are we going to do that bit? Well, you said we're going to do that next week. Oh no, let's do it now. Those kind of messy, behind the curtain, seeing how the sausage is made things can sometimes be a bit. They're always tedious. They're always tedious for the audience to listen to. And if you are editing your own show, if you can, you'd probably take those bits out. But better not to have them in the first place. So it's usually better to be able to nominate somebody to run the show from that point of view, to be able, the puppet master with the strings, able to move things along. Now, two things. One, doesn't have to be the same person each episode. Two, doesn't even have to be the same person within a show. So if you're I was working with a team the other day who's a three-hander, and actually one person might start the show, another person might get us out of the first section, a third person might bring us into the second section, and so on. And that's completely good and valid. But you need to, unless you are going to commit to editing out any meta narrative about who's going to do what from the recording, generally speaking, you want to arrange those things ahead of time. But you absolutely can have multiple people taking on those leadership roles in different spaces, but it needs to be decided who's going to do things. And aside, one of the things I will always say to people I'm working with is, for me at least, when I'm doing broadcast stuff, I will want to make sure that I know my way into something, and I want to know my way out of something. What happens in the middle can flow, and I trust myself that we can have a conversation that will make sense. But my hello and welcome in this kind of context, or what my calls to action are at the end, how we're going to wrap it up, or at least how we're going to throw to a new section, or what my taglines or funny in jokes are that we're going to end on. If you know that you're in and you're out, then the middle can take care of itself. The in, because you need to start reasonably strong in most cases, in most formats, you want to start quite strong. The out, because if you don't know what your out is, again, you'll be reticent to draw things to a close because you're just kind of going, oh shit, how do I end this? But also because it's a good idea to be able to wrap something up neatly. And the in and the out might be bits that you actually longhand script. You might explicitly sit down and type out a script for the in and the out, so that you are wrapping up. You'll be like, right, well, I think that's enough for today. Let's leave it there, and we pick this up again. It's a conversation for another time. And then you turn and look at your script and you read out your script. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you to our guest, so and so, so and so, and so and so. Thank you to our producer, blah, blah. And you've got that bit longhand scripted out, so that can be useful. I did say there were two things I was going to raise. The second one is, everything that I've said in this section presupposes is true most of the time, but it's not always. Some shows can work really well with a more anarchic energy. Some shows can work really well if there are two or more people who have if they've known each other for 20 years and they have an existing incredibly finely tuned and balanced relationship. It would be utter madness for a producer to try and step into that relationship and produce them. Let Bartlett be Bartlett, let that conversation flow. But I think if you those things are rare. So one of my favourite shows is a show called Fortunately, which comes out of the BBC currently, although the stars have just been signed to Times Radio. And in that, it's two very, very experienced BBC broadcasters just having a chat. Now, there is some editing involved. There's some quite light editing from Sam Peach, their producer. I say light editing, light touch editing. They don't try to create a polished conversation. It's often a little bit messy, but very consciously so. But part of the problem with liking that show is it's very hard to recommend it to people to listen to as an example of a good podcast. People always ask me what my favorite podcasts are, and that's definitely one of them. But you have to have the rigor of having been a BBC journalist for many years before you can produce content of that nature, of that informality, that level of informality, in a way that nevertheless respects your audience's time. It is absolutely possible for two or more people to have equal status, but it's often a good idea. It's usually a good idea for somebody to take on a ringmaster role to make sure that conversation will flow well and will be respectful of an audience's time. I think we'll leave this session here for now. talking about how to go out. I know what I'm going to say here, so I can just kind of really off of it, longhand scripted, but I know what I want to say. And I want to say that the next session for this will take place on Twitter Spaces, so you're very welcome to join me there. If you follow me at Chris Finn on Twitter, I will notify you when that's going to happen. If you want to know more about getting started with Kit, then I'm speaking at the Publisher Podcast Summit on the 5th of October at Proud City Cabaret in London. I strongly encourage you to come along to that if you're a publisher in the UK in particular. I'll have a bunch of kit with me. I'll be talking through some of the specific kit choices you can make to make sure that you're spending a small amount of money wisely now to give you a bit of headroom to grow in the future. I hope you can join me for the Twitter Spaces broadcast where you can ask me anything, or indeed at Proud City Cabaret on the 5th of October where you can ask me anything in real life. But for now, I think we'll leave it there.